My sister called me her backup parent and banned me from dating because it would distract me from my responsibilities. I used to think family boundaries were flexible, bendable, something you could shift around whenever someone needed help. Growing up, my older sister Erin was the one who always seemed to need support. She married young, had her first kid at 23, her second the next year, and her third barely 11 months after that. By the time she realized her husband had been drifting further and further from the marriage, she was already carrying more weight than one person ever should. When he eventually left, no dramatic goodbye, just a folded note on the kitchen counter, Erin unraveled. She spent the next few months moving between panic and numb autopilot. I was 26 at the time, working as a rehabilitation specialist at a clinic in the city. I had my own place, a little one-bedroom that smelled like eucalyptus candles because I couldn't resist buying them in bulk. I liked my life. I liked my independence. But the night Erin called me in tears saying she didn't know how she was going to do everything alone, I packed a bag and drove over without thinking twice. I didn't mean to become part of her routine. It just kind of happened. I started stopping by most mornings to help get the kids dressed, mostly because they were adorable chaos goblins who believed socks were optional and toothbrushes were weapons. Then I'd drop them at daycare before heading to the clinic. After work I'd swing back, pick them up, keep them entertained while Erin finished whatever overtime her accounting firm had thrown at her that week. Weekends were park days, library days, snacks bill on a new shirt days. Erin would sit on the bench scrolling through her phone with this exhausted glaze in her eyes, and I'd tell myself I was doing the right thing. Being a good sister. Being a good aunt. And honestly, at first, I didn't mind. The kids loved me. I loved them. They made my quiet apartment feel less lonely. Erin always thanked me, at least in the beginning. She'd say I was saving her life. She'd say I was the only reason she wasn't drowning. I'd brush it off, but hearing it felt good in that guilty, complicated way you feel when someone depends on you too much and you let them because it makes you feel needed. Everything stayed balanced, maybe not perfectly, but balanced enough, until the day Erin got promoted. It wasn't a huge jump in title, but it came with a new team, higher expectations, and a supervisor who, according to her, looked for weaknesses the way hawks looked for mice. Something in Erin shifted the moment she realized people were watching her more closely. Instead of pulling back and reassessing her workload, she leaned harder on me. At first it was subtle. She started calling me my second set of hands when introducing me to people. Then my emergency backup. Then, eventually, said with complete seriousness, my backup parent. I laughed the first time she said it. She didn't. It's what you are, she insisted, like she was offended I didn't already see myself that way. The kids even think of you like one. I tried to shrug it off, but the phrase kept popping up. At school drop-off she corrected a teacher who'd called me a helpful aunt. At the pediatric clinic she told the nurse I handled most of the logistics. At a family barbecue she joked that if she got hit by a bus, I'd know the kids' shoe sizes better than she did. Suddenly, the things I used to do voluntarily turned into things I was expected to do. No more "can you help with pickup?" It shifted into, "you'll get them at 2:45, right?" No more, "if you're free this weekend." It became, "remember, you have them Saturday morning." It wasn't an invitation anymore. It was an assignment. I tried to talk to her about it once. One afternoon, after a long day at the clinic, I told her I needed a few days for myself. I wanted to pick up extra shifts, maybe finally join the rock climbing gym near my apartment that I kept putting off because I was always exhausted. Erin's response was instant and sharp. "You can't," she said, like I'd suggested abandoning the kids at a bus station. "They rely on you. I rely on you. You can't just disappear because you feel like having a hobby." I stared at her. "Erin, I'm not disappearing. I just need some time to myself." She scoffed. "Parents don't get time to themselves, Ava." "You're their parent," I reminded gently. She waved that off like it was a minor detail. "It doesn't matter. You stepped into that role. You can't back out now." I almost asked her when I had agreed to be a co-parent. But the kids were in the next room, trying to balance on foam blocks like tiny, giggling acrobats, and the confrontation died in my throat. So I stayed quiet. Again. But the worst shift, the moment everything truly fractured, happened months later, when I met someone. His name was Theo, a paramedic with a crooked smile and a terrible sense of direction. We met at the climbing gym on a free trial day I finally forced myself to attend. He offered to spot me on a bouldering route, and I joked that if I fell, at least he could patch me up before calling an ambulance. He asked for my number in that shy, hopeful way that made my stomach flip. We'd only gone on 3 dates when Erin found out. She didn't ask. She didn't accidentally see something. She went through my backpack one evening while I was helping the kids sort their puzzles, looking for my phone so she could check something. She found a text from Theo instead. She didn't speak to me for 20 minutes. Then she exploded. "You're dating," she hissed, like I'd committed a betrayal. "You're seriously putting a relationship ahead of your responsibilities." I blinked at her. "Responsibilities?" "The kids," she snapped. "They need you. How do you think it makes them feel that you're running around with some guy instead of being here?" "That's not fair," I said, trying to stay calm. "What's not fair," she shot back, "is that you're abandoning them just because you want a boyfriend. It's selfish, Ava." The words hit me like a slap. The kids, who had been giggling at the kitchen table moments before, fell silent. That night, for the first time, I went home feeling like I'd done something wrong simply for wanting a life of my own. But Erin wasn't finished. Not even close. Because the next day, she presented me with something that would change everything. A printed schedule. A full-blown, color-coded, hour-by-hour breakdown, and a demand for my signature. What Erin wrote at the bottom of that schedule was the moment I realized this wasn't help anymore, it was entrapment. And signing it, that was my biggest mistake. The schedule Erin taped to my apartment door the next morning looked like something a military officer would issue before deployment. Laminated. Color-coded. 3 pages long. Each page had my name at the top as if it were a binding contract I'd already agreed to. I hadn't, but she acted like I had. I found it at 6:15 a.m. when I stepped into the hall, groggy and half-dressed for work. It fluttered in the AC breeze like a warning flag. The first page listed weekday coverage, and beneath it were neatly divided boxes. Dinner, baths, bedtime routine. At the bottom, underlined 3 times, was a sentence. Ava acknowledges these responsibilities are incompatible with casual dating. My blood ran cold. I hadn't imagined it. She genuinely believed she had the authority to suspend my personal life like it was a privilege she'd granted. I took the schedule to work with me, mostly because I couldn't stop staring at it. I kept unfolding it at red lights, studying all the highlighted notes and arrows like they held a secret code. My coworker, Linda, caught me smoothing the pages across the break room table around lunchtime. She raised an eyebrow. "Is that a chore chart?" I didn't answer. Instead, I tilted the paper toward her. She leaned in, scanned a few lines, and froze mid-chew. "Ava," she whispered, "this is a job description. A full-time job description. Did you agree to this?" "No," I said quietly, "but she expects me to sign it." "Are you getting paid?" The laugh that escaped me was bitter. "Of course not." She shook her head. "This isn't normal. This is." She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. I'd already started realizing the same thing. By the time my shift ended, I had a headache behind my eyes and an ache in my chest that felt like guilt, dread, and exhaustion balled into one. I texted Erin asking if we could talk. She responded immediately, "We don't need to talk. Just sign it tonight so we can move forward." Move forward. Those were the exact words my department supervisor used when someone got written up. I drove to Erin's house anyway. My heart pounded when I knocked. She opened the door with one of the kids on her hip and the other 2 clinging to her legs. She looked worn out, but there was a hardness in her posture that didn't used to be there. "Good, you're here," she said, stepping aside. "We can go over the schedule." Not, "Would you like to go over the schedule?" Not, "Can we talk?" Just a flat, expectant demand. I followed her to the kitchen table where she'd laid out pens, sticky notes, and 2 copies of the schedule, like she was preparing for a signing ceremony. She slid one toward me. "Here. The signature line is at the bottom." "Erin," I said slowly, "this is a lot. You're asking me for, what? 20, 30 hours a week." She blinked. "No." 4 to 2. My stomach dropped. You calculated it. Of course. She said this proudly, as if her math was the impressive part. But really, Ava, it's not that different from what you already do. This just makes it official. Official. As if I were applying for the position of second parent. I stared at her. Why do you think you can dictate whether I date? Her jaw tightened. Because if you start seeing someone seriously, you'll stop being reliable. I've seen it happen with other people. You'll get distracted, you'll cancel on the kids, you'll change your priorities. I can't risk instability right now. I swallowed the wave of heat rising in my chest. You can't control my life to prevent your fear. She flinched like I'd struck her. I'm not controlling you. I'm setting boundaries. I almost laughed. Boundaries? These weren't boundaries. They were shackles with bullet points. Erin softened her voice. Look, I know it seems like a lot, but this is just until things calm down at work. I need consistency. You give me consistency. You love the kids, and they love you. Why is that a problem? Because love wasn't a contract. Because helping wasn't ownership. Because she'd stopped asking and started commanding. But all of that tangled in my throat, too heavy to say out loud. She pushed a pen toward me. Just sign it. Ava. Please. I need you. The kids watched from the living room. 3 small faces, trusting me, believing I would always be there because I always had been. Their innocence twisted something sharp in my gut. I knew Erin was manipulating my empathy. She didn't even need to hide it anymore. Still, I signed it. Not because I agreed. Not because I accepted my new title of backup parent. But because something in me needed to see this through. To see exactly how far she would push before the whole structure collapsed. Erin exhaled in relief, like she'd secured a business deal. She snatched the signed copy and slid it into a folder labeled coverage plan. Coverage plan. I left her house that night feeling like I'd sold something I couldn't get back. But I kept my face neutral. Because I needed Erin to believe I was accepting her terms. Because the only way to expose something unreasonable is to let it run its course. The next morning at exactly 6 a.m., as the schedule required, I let myself into Erin's house using the key she'd given me years ago. The sun hadn't even started bleeding into the sky. The hallway lights were still off. The kids were asleep. I sat on the living room couch in silence, hands wrapped around a travel mug of coffee, staring at the dark window while the house creaked awake around me. I didn't wake the kids early. I didn't make breakfast ahead of schedule. I didn't bend the rules. I sat there for 30 minutes, waiting. Because Erin said 6 a.m. And she would get 6 a.m. When she finally came downstairs and saw me sitting stiffly on the sofa, her face twisted into a mixture of confusion and frustration. "What are you doing here?" she whispered. I held up the schedule like a receipt. Morning coverage starts at 6. The irritation flickered in her eyes. "Well, you didn't have to come this early. The kids won't be up for a while." I shrugged. "The schedule says 6. She stared at me, realizing something was off. Realizing I wasn't bending. Realizing the control she thought she had might not work the way she expected. But she didn't know yet how deeply I planned to commit to her own rules. She didn't know that her schedule would become the very thing that unraveled her control. Because following Erin's schedule exactly wasn't compliance. It was the beginning of the collapse she never saw coming. And the firecrack appeared sooner than either of us expected. For the first few days, following Erin's schedule to the exact minute felt like slipping into an alternate version of my own life, a version where everything was predetermined, every moment accounted for, every action measured against someone else's expectations. I arrived at her house each morning at exactly 6, not a minute earlier, not a minute later. I sat in her dim living room waiting for the day to officially start, because the schedule didn't say I should do anything until the kids woke up. Erin would walk downstairs with freshly smudged eyeliner and a frown she tried to hide, pretending she wasn't unnerved by my rigid obedience. She'd mumble something like, "You know you can start breakfast early," and I'd simply tap the schedule and say, "It doesn't say that." She hated the technicality, but she couldn't admit it. In the afternoons, I left work precisely at 1:50 p.m. to arrive at the school parking lot right at 2 p.m., as the schedule demanded, even though school didn't end until 3. I sat for an hour each day, staring out the windshield while teachers walked past giving me confused looks. On Wednesday, An office assistant even tapped on my window to ask if I was okay because sitting in the empty lot day after day looked suspiciously like someone brooding before a life decision. I told her, just following a schedule, and she nodded like she knew better than to ask. By Thursday, my supervisor, Dr. Wynne, pulled me aside with a concerned crease across his forehead. "You're leaving early every day," he said slowly. "Your caseload is suffering. Is there something going on at home?" I handed him a photocopy of the schedule. Watching his face go from confused to incredulous was almost surreal. "Ava," he whispered, "this is employer-level time coverage. This is not something you should be agreeing to. And this," he pointed to the line about dating being incompatible, "is wildly inappropriate." He insisted I take a few days off, but I told him honestly, I'm not trying to make it work. I'm trying to show her it can't work. He didn't argue after that. Meanwhile, the evenings were the worst. According to Erin's schedule, my duties ended at 8 o'clock, and I honored that boundary so precisely it made her unravel. One night, she messaged me at 7:45 saying she was stuck in traffic and would be late. I replied, "I'll be leaving at 8 as the schedule states." When the clock hit 8, I packed my things, told the kids goodnight, locked her door behind me, and left the house dark and quiet. 10 minutes later, my phone rang and Erin's voice exploded through the speaker. "You left them alone," she screamed. "You know I wasn't home." I took a breath and repeated the same calm line I'd practiced in my head. "My duties end at 8, Erin." She accused me of being petty, vindictive, cruel, irresponsible. But really, she was furious because this time, I wasn't allowing her to rely on my flexibility. This time, I was giving her exactly what she demanded. Nothing more, nothing less. The cracks widened fast. By Friday morning, she looked exhausted, hair yanked into a lopsided ponytail, mumbling about being suffocated by all these unexpected gaps, which would have been hilarious if the situation weren't so messy. She had created the gaps. She had created the schedule. She had built the entire trap and somehow still expected me to bend myself into the shape she needed. And yet she hadn't seen the biggest crack forming. The kids were starting to notice. On Saturday, which was mercifully a non-duty day for me, I decided to meet Theo for brunch. The whole time, my mind wandered to Erin's house like some invisible leash was still tied around my wrist. Halfway through pancakes, my phone buzzed with 7 missed calls from her. Then a text, "The kids are asking for you. You need to come." I simply replied, "Saturday is not on the schedule," and put my phone face down. But the guilt clung to me like humidity, thick and suffocating. Later that evening, a voicemail came through, her voice soft and trembling. She said my niece had asked why I didn't love them enough to visit. I knew exactly what that meant. Erin wasn't just bending the truth, she was twisting it into something sharp enough to weaponize. And that was the moment when something inside me, something quiet and long-suffering, snapped. I realized this wasn't about childcare or schedules or helping out. This was about control. Erin's fear of drowning pulling me under with her, and her belief that if she called it family obligation, I couldn't fight it. But the thing about control is that once you see the mechanism behind it, once you see the gears turning, you can't unsee it. Sunday night, I sat at my kitchen table with a schedule spread out in front of me. 3 laminated pages of expectations she believed she had the right to enforce. I ran the numbers. 4 to 2 hours a week she expected from me. That was more than a full-time job on top of my actual full-time job. No wonder I felt bone-deep exhausted all the time. The resentment had been building quietly, but the math made it real. And once the resentment became real, so did my determination. I wasn't simply going to prove the schedule was unreasonable. I was going to make Erin see it. All of it. Every hour. Every crack. Every consequence she'd never considered. And I would do it by doing exactly what she asked, until the whole thing collapsed under the weight of her own demands. Because the collapse was coming, and the moment it hit, Erin wouldn't blame the schedule. She would blame me. And that was when everything would explode. By Monday morning, the weight of Erin's schedule had settled into my bones like something parasitic, something that fed on the quiet spaces of my day until I had no real thoughts of my own left. When I pulled up at exactly 6, the porch light was still off, and the house had that heavy, early morning stillness that made every sound feel like an intrusion. I let myself in with the key she'd insisted I keep just in case, and settled onto the same living room couch where I'd spent the past week waiting in silence. Erin eventually came downstairs rubbing her temples, looking like she hadn't slept, and paused when she saw me sitting in the dark again. "You don't have to do this," she muttered, but there was accusation laced through the words, the kind that meant she wanted me to take initiative, to cook, to prep, to handle everything without being told, yet wasn't willing to admit it. I simply pointed at the schedule folded neatly on the coffee table. She sighed sharply and walked away without another word, the first sign that this rigid system was grinding her down faster than she expected. The kids woke up groggy and clingy, sensing the tension long before anyone said a word. My nephew asked if I'd stay for pancakes, and when I said, "Only until 8, buddy," he frowned like I'd personally broken a promise I didn't know I'd made. Erin shot me a glare that said she blamed me for the look on his face. But she didn't say a thing. Not yet. That came later. That afternoon, I left work precisely when the schedule required. My supervisor, Dr. Wynne, passed me in the hallway and gave me a look I couldn't quite read, part concern, part warning, part disappointment. When I reached the school parking lot, a small cluster of parents were already gathering, each one giving me the now familiar double take. "Why is she here so early?" On Tuesday, the school secretary even stepped outside and said gently, "You don't have to sit out here alone every day, you know." I just smiled tightly and told her, "I do, actually." She gave me this pitying look that made my stomach twist. By Wednesday, Dr. Wynne called me into his office again, not with anger, but with a kind of quiet seriousness that made my heart pound. "Ava," he said, folding his hands on the desk, "your work is slipping. You're distracted. You're tired. You've rescheduled patients 3 times this week. What's going on?" I didn't want to show him the schedule again. It felt humiliating, but I did. His face tightened even further. "This is manipulation," he said softly. "This is not acceptable. For your mental health or your career." His words landed hard because part of me already knew they were true. But I also knew I couldn't quit Erin cold turkey. The backlash would be nuclear. So I promised him I was handling it, even though the truth was murkier. That night, when I arrived at Erin's for evening duties, the kids were already overtired and Erin was fraying like an old rope. She kept dropping things. Her keys, a spoon, her phone, muttering under her breath. At 8 on the dot, I stood, grabbed my bag, and told the kids goodnight. Erin wasn't home yet. The kids blinked at me in confusion. "But Mommy's not here," my niece said, voice trembling. I knelt beside her and told her, "Mommy's coming soon. And my schedule says I leave at 8. It sounded ridiculous even to my own ears, but I forced myself to follow the script. When I stepped outside, Erin called within 15 seconds, shrieking, "Are you insane? You left them." I repeated the same line I always did. My duties end at 8. She called me selfish, dangerous, irresponsible. But underneath the fury, I heard something else. Fear. Not fear for the kids. Fear of losing control of me. The tension peaked on Thursday, when she showed up at my workplace during lunch. She stormed into the break room, so loudly the microwave stopped beeping mid-cycle. "This isn't working," she hissed, waving a crumpled version of the schedule in my face. "You're ruining everything. You're doing this on purpose." For a moment, I just stared at her. Her hair was frizzed from stress, her eyes red and swollen. She looked like someone unraveling thread by thread. My coworkers quietly pretended not to watch, but I could feel their eyes on us like spotlights. "I'm following your schedule," I said evenly. "Exactly as you wrote it." She shook her head violently. "It's not supposed to be literal, Ava. Obviously you use judgment. Obviously you stay if I'm running late." "Then you should have written that," I replied. Her face twisted with something I couldn't quite decipher. Rage. Panic. Maybe shame. "You're punishing me," she whispered. "You're punishing me because you want some guy." And there it was, the truth she'd been circling without naming. She wasn't afraid of losing my help. She was afraid of losing my allegiance. She left the clinic in tears, and suddenly every coworker in the room was looking at me with wide, concerned eyes. After work, I sat at my kitchen table replaying everything, her outburst, her desperation, the way she weaponized the kids' emotions without hesitation. My phone buzzed with a message from Theo. Dinner tonight? Housemaid pasta place just opened. For the first time in days, I couldn't bring myself to answer right away because my life felt like someone else was puppeteering it. But he deserved a yes, and I needed the reminder that I had a life outside Aaron's demands. So I agreed. Dinner was quiet, warm, grounding, until I checked my phone afterward and saw 16 missed calls from Aaron. The last voicemail was her weeping breathlessly, saying the kids thought I didn't want them anymore. I felt something in my chest break, a mixture of fury and grief, because she wasn't just manipulating me anymore. She was hurting the kids to do it. And that was the line I could no longer ignore. Because the next message Aaron sent wouldn't just cross a line, it would burn the entire bridge between us. The message that finally detonated everything didn't come as a phone call or a meltdown in my workplace. It came at 5:12 a.m. the next morning, arriving with a soft vibration on my nightstand, gentle and insidious, the way poison sometimes slips into the body before symptoms show. I woke up groggy, blinking at the screen, and felt my breath stall when I saw the text preview. If you cared about this family, you'd move in with us until I get through this. We can convert the storage room into your space. For a long, stunned moment, I just stared at the words, trying to understand what reality Erin was living in that she believed she had the right to propose, no, dictate, that I uproot my life and relocate like some live-in support unit that existed only to serve. She added a second message a minute later that pushed me from disbelief into something dangerously close to rage. If you start a relationship right now, it shows me where your priorities actually are. That was the moment something inside me snapped so sharply I almost felt it physically. She wasn't asking for help. She was issuing an ultimatum, one dressed in faux concern but dripping with entitlement. I sat on the edge of my bed, heart thudding unevenly, reading the messages again and again until the syllables lost shape. When I finally got up and started my morning routine, I moved like someone dragging heavy chains, because that's what her expectations felt like, chains masquerading as family responsibility. But I still arrived at exactly 6, as the schedule required. When Erin opened the door, she wasn't the frantic, brittle version of herself from the past week. Instead, she had this eerie calm, the calm of someone who had convinced themselves their demands were not only reasonable but righteous. "Did you get my messages?" she asked, crossing her arms like she was bracing for an argument she believed she'd already won. "I did," I said, stepping inside. I didn't offer more. She wanted a debate. I wasn't giving her one. As the kids slowly trickled into the living room with rumpled pajamas and sleepy eyes, Erin stood behind me like a supervisor evaluating an employee. "Ava," she said, voice clipped, "I need to know your answer. We can't keep going like this. I need commitment. Full commitment. Commitment." As if helping her was a marriage vow. As if my existence revolved around alleviating her burdens. When I didn't respond, she added sharply, "I'm offering a solution for everyone. You move in temporarily, the kids get stability, I get support, and you won't have the temptation to run around dating men who aren't going to matter long term." I froze mid-step, slowly turning to look at her. "Run around?" She shrugged. "It's a distraction, Ava. You know it is." The kids were in the room, little ears tuned to every syllable, so I swallowed what I wanted to say. Instead, I said nothing at all. And that silence, strangely, made her snap faster than any confrontation could have. "You're being selfish," she hissed under her breath as she followed me into the kitchen. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. It's just a temporary sacrifice, but every time I ask for help, you act like I'm torturing you." I kept buttering toast, my hand steady even as my pulse hammered. But inside, a storm was building. When 8 o'clock came, I followed the schedule exactly. I picked up my bag and announced, "I'm heading out." Erin's voice went shrill instantly. "You didn't answer me. You can't just leave." I looked directly at her and said, "My duties end now." She stared at me as if I'd slapped her, her face twisting with disbelief that her sister, the dependable one, the soft one, the one she thought she could mold, wasn't caving this time. "Fine," she spat. "But don't expect me to hold this family together alone. Don't expect gratitude when you're abandoning these kids." That word, abandoning, sank its teeth in me. I carried it with me the entire drive to work, anger simmering beneath my ribs. Around noon, Theo texted me, "Lunch break? I'm near your building." Normally, I would have said yes immediately, but I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to see him, but because Erin had wormed so deeply into my brain that even my free hours felt like stolen time. That was when I realized the truth. She had conditioned me into believing that choosing myself was disloyalty. So I texted him back, "Yes. Meet you outside in 10. Lunch with him was warm, grounding, normal in a way the rest of my life no longer felt. He listened quietly when I explained the latest escalation, his eyebrows pulling together in disbelief. "Ava," he said gently, "this isn't helping your sister anymore. This is enabling her." And something about hearing those words out loud made my chest loosen. But the peace didn't last long. When I returned to my car, I saw a missed call from the school. That sinking feeling hit instantly. When I answered, the receptionist said, "Hi, Ms. Carter. We just wanted to let you know that your sister dropped off an emergency contact form update. She listed you as the primary guardian for all 3 kids." My vision blurred for a second. "Primary guardian?" "Yes," she said. "She said you'd be handling all immediate decisions moving forward." My stomach dropped so hard I had to lean against the car door. Erin hadn't just tightened the leash. She'd put my name in official paperwork, claiming authority I never agreed to take. And worse, she used that paperwork to make me legally responsible for her choices. My hands shook as I ended the call. I didn't even start the engine. I just sat there in stunned silence, realizing Erin had crossed from manipulation into something far more dangerous, rewriting reality to match the version of sisterhood she believed she was entitled to. The schedule wasn't the trap. The guardian form was. Because once I confronted her about that form, Erin wouldn't apologize. She would reveal the plan she'd been building behind my back all along. I drove straight to Erin's house after the school call, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, because this wasn't something I could ignore or rationalize or put off until a calmer moment. Listing me as the primary guardian wasn't an oversight. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't exhaustion or stress or a misunderstanding of the form. It was deliberate, calculated, and terrifying. When I pulled into her driveway and stormed up the porch steps, I didn't bother knocking. I walked straight in, and Erin, who was sitting at the kitchen table folding tiny pink socks, looked up like I'd merely arrived early for babysitting. "You can't just barge in," she said flatly, not even blinking at the fury she had to see radiating off me. "We need to talk," I said, holding back the tremor in my voice. "Why did the school call me saying you changed the guardian forms without telling me?" She didn't flinch. She didn't even shift uncomfortably. Instead, she said, "Because it's practical. You're already helping. This just formalizes things." My jaw dropped. Formalizes things. "Erin, you made me the primary guardian. That means if something happens, I am legally responsible." She waved a hand dismissively, like I was overreacting. "Nothing is going to happen. But the school needed consistent contact information, and you're the one who shows up. You're the stable one." I could feel my pulse hammering in my neck. "You don't get to decide that for me." Her mouth tightened in that stubborn line she wore whenever she'd already mentally justified her actions. "I'm their mother, Ava. I'm allowed to make decisions for their well-being. And your family, you should want to be listed." I stared at her, stunned by the audacity, the entitlement, the way she cloaked manipulation in maternal language. "Wanting to help you," I said slowly, "is not the same thing as signing up for custody." She scoffed. "You're being dramatic. It's just paperwork." "No," I snapped, louder than I intended. "Paperwork is a permission slip or a volunteer form. This is a legal designation. You didn't ask me. You didn't even warn me. You just handed my name to the school like it belonged to you." She slammed the basket of socks down, her calm facade finally cracking. "Because if I had asked," she hissed, "you would have said no. And you saying no isn't an option right now." My breath caught. There it was, the truth she had been avoiding, the truth she thought she could bury beneath guilt and obligation. "Not an option." I whispered. "Ava, I am drowning," she said, her voice rising. "I'm working 50 hours a week, managing 3 kids alone, dealing with a boss who keeps hinting about layoffs, and you want to talk about paperwork? You're my sister. You're supposed to help me, not fight me. I stepped back, shaking. I've been helping you, Erin. I've been living by your schedule, rearranging my life, sacrificing my time, my work, my mental health, and it's still not enough for you. It's never enough. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Because you're half in, half out. You give a little, then pull back. You show up, then you disappear. I never know if you're committed. I need someone who won't run off when things get tough. There was something desperate in her eyes, wild, frantic, clinging, and for the first time, I understood. She wasn't afraid of losing help. She was afraid of losing control. I'm not running off, I said, voice trembling. I'm setting boundaries. Boundaries, she repeated, as if the word offended her. Boundaries are what people use when they want an excuse not to show up. You used to show up for me. You used to be dependable. Ever since you started talking to that man, everything changed. And there it was again. Theo, somehow the villain in her narrative. This isn't about him, I said. This is about you refusing to see me as a separate person. Her eyes flashed. You aren't separate, Ava. We're family. You're supposed to orbit each other. I've always been there for you, haven't I? When you needed a place to stay. When you broke your ankle. When you? Those were choices, I interrupted. Not obligations. And I thanked you. I never tried to turn you into my live-in caretaker. She looked away then, jaw tight, silence stretching thick between us. Then she muttered, You don't get it. You never get it. Everything is always harder for me. I need someone dependable, not someone who bails when her life gets mildly interesting. I felt my stomach twist. You listed me as primary guardian because you were afraid I might date someone. She didn't deny it. Instead, she walked to the counter, picked up a stack of mail, and said quietly, I can't have instability in the kids' lives right now. And if that means you need to put your personal life on hold for a while, then yes, I expect that. It's what a real sister would do. My breath caught. A real sister, I repeated, the words hollow. She nodded firmly. Yes, a real sister. I suddenly realized there was no version of this conversation where she admitted wrongdoing, where she apologized, where she understood the gravity of what she'd done. Erin didn't want help. She wanted ownership. She didn't want support. She wanted control. She didn't want a sister. She wanted a second mother, one she didn't have to pay, one she didn't have to consult, one she could shape and bend and guilt into compliance. And she had finally said it out loud. She believed she was entitled to me. I looked at her then, really looked at her, the exhaustion, the resentment, the entitlement, and something inside me hardened. Remove my name from those forms, I said quietly. She froze. What? Today, I continued. Call the school. Tell them it was a mistake. Get my name off those documents. Her face drained of color. Absolutely not, she said. That would be irresponsible. It would be dangerous. It would prove you don't care about the kids. No, I said, straightening. It proves I care about myself. She stared at me like she didn't recognize me, like I'd transformed into a stranger right in front of her. And maybe, in a way, I had, because this was the first time I wasn't compromising, bending, softening, or apologizing. I was drawing a line. And she hated it. She hated it so much she whispered, If you do this, Ava, don't expect us to come back from it. I didn't answer, because whether Erin realized it or not, we had already crossed the point of no return. And I had no idea that within 24 hours, someone outside our family, someone with authority, would step in and force everything into the open. The intervention didn't come from a therapist, a coworker, or even my supervisor. It came from the school itself, less than 24 hours after I confronted Erin about the guardian forms. I was in the middle of filing a case note at work when my office phone rang, and the receptionist transferred a call from the district administrative office. The woman on the line was polite, calm, almost overly gentle in that rehearsed way people use when handling potential legal issues. She explained that the school flagged the updated guardian forms because the signature didn't match the one in my file from years ago when I volunteered at a school event. We just need to verify your consent, she said. For a moment, I said nothing. My brain froze, suspended between shock and humiliation. I didn't sign anything, I finally managed. I didn't authorize any guardian changes. There was a small pause on the other end, the kind that vibrates with unspoken concern. All right, she said. In that case, we need you to come in this afternoon to formally dispute the change. And we'll need to speak with your sister as well. My chest tightened. I knew Erin would explode at the school. I knew she would paint herself as overwhelmed, misunderstood, maybe even victimized. But I also knew I had no choice. This had moved beyond family dysfunction into legal territory. At 3:30, after picking up the kids per the schedule one last time, I walked them home and told Erin, the school needs to speak to us. Now. The color drained from her face instantly, and a sharp defensiveness snapped into place. What? Why? They had no right to call you. This is harassment. They called because the signature didn't match, I said evenly. And because you can't assign guardianship without consent. She sputtered something about bureaucratic overreach and wasting her time, but 10 minutes later, she was in my passenger seat, arms crossed, jaw clenched, muttering under her breath about ungrateful siblings and incompetent institutions. When we arrived at the school office, the air felt thick with tension. The administrator, a calm, middle-aged woman with silver glasses, asked us to sit. Erin immediately began explaining, fast and frantic, about her workload, the stress, how much I help, how close we are, how the kids depend on me, how she thought updating the form was perfectly reasonable. The administrator listened without interrupting, then turned to me. Did you consent to being listed as primary guardian? No, I said. My voice didn't shake. I didn't even know. Erin whipped toward me, eyes blazing. Why are you doing this? She whispered. Why are you acting like a stranger? The administrator cleared her throat gently. Ms. Carter, guardianship is a legal designation. It cannot be assigned without explicit permission, and it cannot be used as a substitute for childcare or emotional support. Erin's mouth dropped open. I wasn't. That's not. You don't understand. She's supposed to help me. The administrator's tone stayed neutral, but firm. Help is voluntary. Guardianship is enforceable. They are not the same. I watched Erin crumble in real time, the certainty she'd been clinging to like a life raft finally dissolving under actual authority. She tried again, desperate. But she's family. Doesn't that mean anything? It means something, the administrator said gently. But it does not mean everything. Silence fell, heavy and stinging. The woman slid a corrective form toward us, requiring only my signature to void Erin's update. I signed it without hesitation. When we walked back to the car, Erin's pace was stiff, almost robotic. She didn't speak until we were seated and the doors were closed. You humiliated me, she said quietly, staring at her hands. No, I replied. You did that when you tried to take away my autonomy. She flinched, as if the word autonomy was a slap. You're my sister, she whispered. I needed you. I softened, just slightly, not in the way that bends, but in the way that allows truth to settle. Needing me is fine, I said. Owning me isn't. She shook her head, tears finally spilling. I wasn't trying to own you. I was afraid. If you built your own life, what would be left for me? That was the moment I realized her control wasn't born from cruelty, it was born from fear, abandonment, and a desperate need for someone to anchor her. But fear doesn't justify crossing legal boundaries. Fear doesn't justify consuming another person's life. Fear doesn't justify forbidding me to date, to rest, to choose. Erin, I said softly, I love the kids. I will always love the kids. But I can't be their other parent. And you can't keep acting like I already signed that role away. She covered her face, crying harder now, shoulders shaking. I didn't touch her. I didn't comfort her. For once, I let her feel the consequences of her own decisions. The drive home was silent, the air thick with things we both knew but didn't say. When she stepped out of the car, she didn't ask if I was coming in. She didn't mention the schedule. She didn't demand anything. She just whispered, I'm sorry, before closing the door. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't enough. But it was a start. Over the next week, she rewrote the schedule, not pages of demands, not rigid expectations, not 42 hours of unpaid labor. Just a short message that said, "Can you help me on Thursdays? Only if you want to." And for the first time in months, I felt something like freedom settle into my chest. A week later, I went on a real date with Theo. And this time, there were no missed calls, no guilt trips, no emotional storms waiting for me afterward. Erin was rebuilding herself, slowly, painfully, genuinely, and I was rebuilding my boundaries. It didn't erase everything that happened, but it ended the cycle. It ended the ownership. It ended the unspoken contract that was never mine to sign. And maybe, just maybe, it gave both of us room to become better versions of ourselves.